Welcome, everybody. And quick introduction. I'm Austin Dressman. If you don't know me already, I'm a community and events manager at Engaging Networks. And welcome to today's webinar, where we'll be pulling back the curtain on 10 years of email data to show you exactly how that strategy around email has transformed over the years. Today we have Andy Salinas, who is the digital strategist at Corner Shop Creative. And having spearheaded the initial digital efforts for League of Women Voters, Andy brings a unique firsthand perspective on how to scale a national email campaign program while staying agile in a changing democracy. And they will also be sharing some really interesting takeaways with us today, just data points and other things like that that are going to be really interesting. So hopefully that's some stuff you'll be able to take away as well from today. A quick note, I mentioned this at the top here, but this webinar is being recorded and will be sent to all attendees, and anybody that signed up, I should say, for this webinar. But we'll also be putting it on our academy, so you can share that with your team if there's some other takeaways here that you want to kind of share among your organization. I'd love for you to be able to do that. I'm going to shift things off over to Andy. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks again, everybody, for being here. I'm really excited to share what we've learned. So, just to give you a little brief overview of what we're going to cover today. So, I'll do a brief introduction of myself. I'll do some context around the presentation. I'll go over Corner Shop's process basics and then 8 lessons that we have learned through our process here. So, my name is Andy Salinas. I use they, them pronouns. I'm based in Denver, Colorado. I am a senior project manager for digital strategy at Corner Shop. I've been there for about 5 years, but before I was at Corner Shop, I was actually in the nonprofit world. I also have an MSW, so I am familiar with some of the struggles that y'all go through on a day-to-day basis. And I work on a wide range of digital projects, so anything from engaging network stuff to email marketing to website development, all sorts of stuff. And I have one cat, and she's really cute. Here's a picture. All right, so before jumping into the presentation, I do want to give a little background about the League of Women Voters and what the national landscape has looked like for the past 10 years. So the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan grassroots organization focused on working to protect and expand voting rights and ensure everyone is represented in our democracy. And over the past 10 years, from 2015 to 2025, we have definitely seen a vastly changing national and especially political landscape. So we saw 3 different presidents and 4 presidential terms. We saw some landmark Supreme Court cases, still seeing landmark Supreme Court cases pretty much every day at this point. We've seen several mass shootings, the COVID pandemic and subsequent lockdown, and the surge of misinformation and the rise of AI. I just want to give a little context because this was all happening while the league was sending out their emails. So just to give a little background because it's important. And then I'll just do a really quick picture of what our work with the league looks like behind the scenes. So for the process, we have copy delivered, we do production and internal QA. So we create the email, we do an internal QA, we pass it along for client revisions, and then we send the email out and we report. So all of our templates are fully tested across multiple platforms, multiple versions of iPhone because there's about 1,000 now. Um, we make sure there's Outlook and dark mode specific code, which is very important. We use all live text wherever possible, and then we make sure we use accessibility as a priority. And then we also diligently track email statistics for all emails we send out. We do make sure to track them outside of the current CRM because organizations can and will migrate CRMs. So having this information in an external location is important. This is the key to what allowed us to be able to review 10 years of email data. So now we can move on to the lessons. So lesson number 1, the first lesson, plan your email tone and CTA intensity together. What does that mean? So here's a really quick chart of how we measured tone intensity. On one end of the scale, we have like a joyful, celebratory tone, which usually has language like "we did it" and like "together we made history." The focus here is pure positivity, victory, or like celebration. Moving through the levels at level 5, that's where we transform into a more neutral or informative tone. This is generally used when the intent of the email is to explain something that's like happening without creating any sense of urgency, even if it's an alarming situation. So the tone is like balanced, it's calm, it's factual. And then looking at the other end of the chart, we've got the opposite of joyful and celebratory, which is a more somber or grave tone. This hasn't necessarily been the predominant tone in league emails, but it's still important to include. I also want to note that this is definitely a subjective setup for this and for the CTA levels. So based on your brand voice, you might put these tones in a different order, or you might have different levels of tones. All right, and then moving on to CTA intensity. So this is another quick table that shows how we measured CTA intensity. So ranging from a gentle ask that has like no urgency at all, like learn more about our work, to an extreme or like immediate urgency that's, something like there are only hours left in this match, give now. So what did we learn from kind of running through that data? So when creating your email copy, it is important to consider how tone pairs with your CTA intensity. So, like a re-engagement campaign or progress reports don't need the same intensity as an alarming court ruling. It can help to create an emotional arc over a campaign. So, the same intensity throughout a campaign can burn people out or even like cheapen the power of the intense asks. Um, so instead, we'd recommend focusing on an emotional rhythm that keeps donors engaged without exhausting them. So through the league's data, we found that high urgency CTAs did tend to perform the best when paired with hopeful or empowering tones. Now, this may be situational or audience dependent, but it does show that you don't always need somber or grave tones paired with urgent asks. You can have an urgent ask, but use a more hopeful tone to keep the email from sounding alarmist. And then to make sure donors don't get burned out during a campaign, especially for those that haven't given yet, you can shift your tone as a way to re-engage donors like mid-campaign. So once the campaign peaks, you can immediately pivot from urgent to grateful. A simple "here's what you accomplished" email, like mid or like post-campaign, helps reset emotion and it can help prevent burnout. So we also found that gratitude emails sent within 3 to 5 days after the end of a high urgency campaign, those tended to restore engagement up to 30% faster. So more generally, it helps also to anchor asks in agency because donors may be more likely to give when they believe their specific action makes a difference. And like, of course, like any donation makes a difference, but some donors may have a hard time seeing how their $5 specifically changes anything. You can also pair high intensity CTAs with a statement of impact. Like instead of saying time is running out, you can say something like, you can make the difference before midnight. So agency can turn anxiety into action. So lesson number 2, expect and plan for donor fatigue. So donors can become fatigued by constant high intensity asks or back-to-back asks. It's important to plan periods of like trust rebuilding between campaigns. We generally saw that after intense asks, there was a cool down period where donors gave less, and I'm sure you've probably seen similar trends. So this is a good time to focus on stewardship by sending things like thank you emails, impact reports, and just general gratitude. As I mentioned in the last slide, this can help you bounce back a little faster in your next campaign. And don't think about donor fatigue, especially just around year-end campaigns. End of year is obviously a high ask time, and people are already inclined to potentially give more. But think about the campaigns you send during the rest of the year too. You're probably not the only org that the person is hearing from, but it can make you stand out when you focus on relationship building during the rest of the year too, and not just during year end. All right, lesson 3. So, Giving Tuesday and end of year are still fundraising powerhouses. Um, this probably isn't a surprise, but end of year and Giving Tuesday are still huge events in the email world. I know they definitely are. Like with the league, it generally accounts for like a considerable amount of fundraising for many nonprofits. It could be a significant portion of the budget for the year. But it's still important to think about how you engage with your audience. So we found in the highest performing end of year campaigns, it wasn't just like urgency alone that converted. I kind of mentioned this earlier. It was also pairing that urgency with hope, meaning things like we can do this tended to beat things like we're running out of time. And just thinking in the context of the first slide, or one of the first slides where I talked about the political landscape, we did see that this kind of, higher urgency CTA paired with a hopeful tone did seem to capture folks, even with all of the things going on. As we have seen, there have been a lot of things going on. Um, and we also don't want to forget the period between Giving Tuesday and end of year. So most organizations tend to peak during the weeks of Giving Tuesday and the end of the year. But we did see a giving bump like 7 to 10 days after Giving Tuesday with the league. We also found that emails sent right after Giving Tuesday with messages like, here's the impact so far, converted 18% more than pre-Giving Tuesday emails. So we can see that donors may be staying warm longer than we assume. They may just need to see the impact, or some sort of impact to lead to a potential conversion. And the biggest boost in end of year fundraising, I think it definitely comes down to consistency and not necessarily volume. So the league did have an increase in email output between, 2015 and 2025, but more emails didn't always mean a better performance. It was more so how consistent the narrative felt across the end of year campaigns. So the league supporters would often respond better during end of year to story arcs as opposed to blitzes. So thinking about awareness leading to action, leading to impact, leading to gratitude is kind of a little bit of a cycle. But that can kind of help you, create that narrative arc that makes the donor feel engaged and involved in the work that you do. Excuse me. So lesson number four, I actually kind of just talked about this. Balancing email volume with efficiency. So thinking about where we left off on the last slide, we did learn that email volume increased a lot for the league from 2015 to 2025. And I will say that I did start working with the league specifically. I took over that project about 4 or 5 years ago, pretty close to when I started. So I've been working with the league for half of that time, that we've been working with them. So I have seen some of this like in person. Um, but what's important to be aware of is that as your email volume increases, you do run the risk of decreasing your efficiency. So, you could be sending out more emails. You could potentially see a bump in gifts because of those emails with that, increased volume, but that can come at the expense of the cost it takes to get those emails out because an email isn't something that just comes out of nowhere. It does take effort, whether that's, somebody's time or monetary effort. And this ultimately may or may not matter to you, but like I said, where it becomes important is when you consider the cost. So, how much of your employee's time do you want to take to get that email out there, or how much, when you're working with an agency, how many hours do you want to spend getting that campaign out? um, because more improved email efficiency could free up time to focus on maintaining like more diverse donor streams. Because even though we know that email is still a really great tool for fundraising and it does have a really high ROI, it's important to not just rely on email for your fundraising. It's definitely important to make sure your donor streams are diverse. Um, And then on top of that, inboxes are already crowded anyways. Like I keep getting notifications from Google that my inbox space is running out. And one day maybe I'll go through all my emails, but there's just so many emails, that it's just hard to do. So instead of sending more emails, maybe find other ways to stand out. So like you of course want to make sure the donor remembers you. you don't want to send an email like once a month or like however often you send emails, you don't want to send it so it's like they hear from you very sporadically. But you also don't want to spam their inbox. So find ways to stand out through other things like email design and content by trying different things to see what converts better. Um, so for the league, we did see the biggest increase in revenue around messages that were really well timed, that aligned with moments in national history, and then of course paired with encouraging tones. And there are a lot of important national historic moments happening, especially right now. So it can be good to kind of think about what moments align with your org's mission. All right, moving on to lesson 5. So design and accessibility matter. And this is something I care a lot about because I think emails are a really great tool for reaching out a lot of diverse audiences. And it's important to make sure that you're not alienating any specific groups by not having accessible emails or by having emails that don't really have like accessible designs. So I'm going to show a few email designs from 2015 to 2025. Kind of shows you how the league's email style has evolved over time. So we've got 2015. You can see the message is very clear. And it's got, definitely 2015 vibes. Then moving on to 2019, we can see a definite bigger shift in some of the branding and some of the style of the email, and definitely in some of the colors. Then moving on to 2021. So you can see some similarities to the previous email, but you can also see some changes in the design itself, and then landing on what we have today. So this is an email from 2025. This is specifically an email that I remember putting together. But going through all of these designs, we can see, some similarities, like I said, but an ultimate like evolution in style that it's like evolved alongside technology. So if you think about websites from 2015, they don't really look like modern websites. And the digital landscape changes pretty frequently. So it's important to make sure your email design doesn't stagnate and that you're keeping up with those designs. So the current email design focuses on very clear legibility. So there's adequate line spacing, there's adequate padding, there's adequate margins. And this means keeping things legible in a roughly like 600 pixel wide space. So it's important to remember that emails are not as wide as web pages or Word docs, and they get even narrower on mobile. So your design really needs to reflect that because you're working with a lot less space. So spending extra time to think about like what would be that a valuable use of that space is important. You know, again, if you're designing an email in a PDF, I would really highly recommend making sure that the email, like the PDF design, is the exact same width as your email, so that you can actually see how things will lay out. Because a lot of times things look very different in a PDF. And then another really small note, if you're not familiar, any image that you have, make sure it's double the width that you want it to appear in an email. So if it's a full space header, make sure it's actually, if your email is 600 pixels wide, make sure it's 1200 pixels wide so that you can trigger Retina ready images in iPhone. So we can also see in the email there's a well-positioned logo that clearly indicates who's emailing you without dominating the header space. It's not like the main focus of the email, but it is still very important. It's kind of one of the first things you see. Um, and then we also use live text wherever possible. So if you see in the email where it says double your gift today, that's actually live text. And live text means text that you can like copy or paste. It's not part of an image. And we do that because there are a lot of folks that can't, not can't, they don't have images turned on by choice. They don't want to do that. Or sometimes people have very slow internet and loading images is kind of tough. So whenever you have text that's part of an image, it disappears if somebody has the images turned off or it can't load. That's why we use live text wherever possible to make sure it actually shows up. And then all of the buttons in this email are also actual buttons and not images. So they are coded parts of the email and not an image itself. So again, like I said, that makes sure that if the images are turned off, no matter what happens, you'll be able to see that button and that message won't get lost. The CTA is also clear and appropriately spaced, so meaning the ask is clear and can be seen as soon as you open the email. It was very clear what is being asked in this email. So lesson number 6 is it pays to be. So what does that mean? So I did mention that the league is pretty adept at creating messages that align and are timed with national moments in history. So we definitely saw some big jumps in giving happen right after major national events, especially with like court rulings and elections. So some donors are definitely more likely to give when what's happening in the world feels, personal and immediate. It's important to be flexible in your email strategy to use the momentum of a national event to get your message out. So we've seen this with the league when responding to national events that relate to their mission, that momentum usually leads to noticeable bumps in giving. So now I will say this is not necessarily a time to be trying out new things. These are usually one-off emails, maybe 2 emails at the most. So having a very simple, repeatable template that will let you get your responses out very quickly. And so something like if you have like an evergreen header with a very clear message that's paired with a simple body design, that will let you keep your email strategy flexible because you already know what the email will look like. You just kind of need to figure out what you're going to say. And it also kind of helps maintain a little bit of brand consistency in that if somebody opens this email and they see that evergreen header or something like it, they know that this is like, oh, this is a big deal. This is a big event. We should maybe pay attention to what's going on. So our quick response design specifically lets us get an email out within hours of copy being ready. So we could have copy delivered and we can have the email made very quickly. We can turn it around really fast because we do have a simple template in engaging networks that allows us to easily make updates and we know exactly how it'll perform across email service providers. So we have no surprises or unexpected roadblocks in the code that could delay the response because we do test our emails in Litmus. We look at them across different service providers. So we were looking at Windows, we're looking at all many versions of Outlook from 2019 to 2065, 365. We're looking at light mode, we're looking at dark mode, we're checking all the things. So here's just a really quick chart showing some of the quick responses that went out after some big events. So you can see that most responses were out within a few days, but the majority of our responses do tend to go out within 24 hours. We did see that those responses saw increased giving across the board. So, like whether you compared it to the previous week, the previous month, or even the same time last year, um, those quick responses to those events definitely showed increases in giving. So, like with when Scalia was no longer part of the Supreme Court, when Kavanaugh was confirmed, the January 6th Capitol attack, the Supreme Court rulings. So we've got, Monroe v. Harper, Allen v. Milligan, that's what it is. And then the early Trump policy reversals, we can see there was always an increase in donations, the amount of donations, the number of donations we got, and there was always an increase in the revenue we got from those donations. I'll leave this up for a second so you just kind of take a look. All right. So, lesson number 7, sender reputation matters. What does that mean? If this is a subject you're not as familiar with, you'll likely maybe will have heard about it during a CRM migration if you've done one or if you've been part of one. So while we've been with the league, we've gone through a couple CRM migrations, and sender reputation is definitely an important part of that move. So when you're migrating, worming can be an important tool depending on the CRM. If you're not familiar, worming is when you gradually increase the email send volume to increase your sender reputation. Um, this can be done by temporarily breaking large audiences into smaller groups. But with some tools, like engaging networks, warming isn't necessarily needed because you're essentially borrowing from the sender reputation of other clients using EN. So it's not something you necessarily have to do. But I'm assuming all of you are probably on it in engaging networks, so it's not something you have to worry about right now. But sender reputation doesn't necessarily end after you've moved to your new CRM, which is probably engaging networks. Sender reputation is something it needs to be maintained continuously because that's what gets your email in the inbox of your donors. There are definitely a few factors that influence sender reputation. And so specifically it's engagement. So that's your open rates, how often people open your emails, how often they click through your emails, the number of spam complaints you get, and the bounce rate of your emails, and then your just overall send history. So to give a little bit more detail, if you haven't really thought too much about your sender reputation, there are some things you can do to improve it or like kind of help maintain it. So the first thing you can look at is a very, very, very carefully run re-engagement campaign. That can help you let go of contacts that aren't serving you. I know that can be difficult, and it can also be difficult to get buy-in from other people, and especially in your org that really want to maintain those contacts because it's always a, well, what if they donate, now, or what if next month is the time that they finally donate? Run a re-engagement campaign to see if you can capture that. So if your open rate is low, you can look at setting up re-engagement campaigns, and you can set them up at specific intervals. So you could look at running a campaign for like 6 months to 6 month non-openers, so people that haven't opened an email in the last 6 months, and then if they don't open that first email, they would then move on to maybe like they haven't opened an email in the past 12 months, and then after 12 months of not opening, if they haven't opened that second engagement email, that would be a good time to boot them from your list, which I know is hard to do. But I say that because if you can't catch them with a re-engagement campaign, they're maybe not going to donate again. And if they do donate again, you'll capture them when their interest is actually high. So when they make that second donation, they're actually engaged and they actually do want to hear from you. But like I was saying, it is something you need to do very carefully. So you are sending to audiences that are considered non-engaged. You're sending to folks that aren't likely to engage, so it can impact your reputation if you send to those folks too frequently. Because like I said, open rates can impact your email, so you want to make sure you're sending to folks that actually want to open your emails. So you definitely want to make sure your campaign is on the short side. So that's why I was saying like maybe one, maybe two emails. And then you want to definitely take advantage of subscription management centers like the one you can set up in engaging networks. Give folks options around how they hear from you and like what topics they're interested in. So this will likely also improve your unsub rates because the people you're sending emails to, they actually want to read them or they actually want to read about the topic that you're sending to. Because again, folks that, maybe open your newsletter but don't open your donation campaigns, they may not necessarily ever open a donation campaign. So it could be a good time to like give them options. Also think about creating engaging content and designs. So running A/B tests on your email content and designs regularly to make sure you're optimized for your audience is a really great thing to do. So you can do things like test your donation button placement. You can test colors, of course, but also testing your from address, testing your subject line to see what kind of triggers more of those opens. You can also test to see how much personalization is too much. Some people like personalization. I remember the first time I actually saw it in my inbox, I was kind of freaked out, but now I understand what it is, having worked in marketing for a while. But this does help to keep your emails relevant to your audience as it changes over the years, because your audience will you definitely have those hardcore people that are going to stay with you the whole time, and then you're going to have people that come in and out, but you want to make sure you're optimizing for those audiences. Which, the next tip, um, segmenting is also a huge part of that. So that can help with sender reputation, since you can create audiences based on engagement. I know Engaging Networks has great tools for this too. So you can target high converting audiences with more emails and then send fewer emails to lower converting audiences. And that'll kind of help you maintain that higher open rate. And then, like I said before, think about your email volume and not just in the context of efficiency. So, sending a lot of emails can start to feel spammy. And if you suddenly increase your email volume a lot, it can even be flagged as spam by the email service provider. And that's who's deciding where to put your email in somebody's inbox. Um, So these are some general tools. You might already have a re-engagement campaign running. It can be good to check the open rates on those emails, check the bounce rate, make sure everything is actually like going through. And again, like I know it's hard, but I think the biggest thing that I would say is really focus on maintaining a clean list. If you have folks that you will never send a fundraising email to, either segment them to a different audience or remove them from your list, especially if they're not opening any emails at all. All right, and then lesson 8. Your data tells a story. So I know there's only like a few things on this slide, but I think it's really important to think about how ultimately your data is telling a story. Some of the things I said here may not work for you, and that's where your specific data comes in to tell the whole story of your audience. Your data definitely shouldn't be something you use just to show how well you're performing. Don't make it a report card of like, oh, well, we didn't send out or, we didn't achieve this open rate. Dang, our email, campaign, our email strategy is failing. It should be something you should actually use to help inform decisions about future strategy. Your data is also what can transform your email strategy into better messaging for your whole audience. So your data is trying to tell you something, so listen. Maybe your re-engagement campaign would run better with, this is totally random. I'm making this up. This is probably not true for anybody, but maybe it is. I don't know. But maybe your re-engagement campaign would run better with a 24-month non-opening audience, because you have a large number of donors that magically like reappear after a year. That's possible. You only know that if you look at your data. So maybe you also have a lot of people that respond well to personalization, or you don't have a lot of people that respond well to personalization. So also think about the different ways you can look at your data to find out new things about your audience. So comparing different statistics at different times and over different campaigns, really think about the copy that you were sending out and the subject line, the preview text, like how your email looked, what how did that all relate to, the open rate for that email for the whole campaign? Did some emails perform better than others? Think about why and compare those different data points to create a more holistic picture. And then the one more thing to look at. So, we're all here because of Engaging Networks, and Engaging Networks has a lot of really great tools that can help you with your email journey. So the reporting tools, especially the new reporting tools, can let you leverage different reports at regular intervals to show how campaigns are performing and definitely indicate when a strategy change may be in order. The existing data dashboard is great by itself too. I love it. It gives a really great snapshot of your current performance and lets you spot potential problem areas quickly. Um, and then if you haven't moved over to the new email builder yet, I'd really recommend that you do. It does give you a lot more flexibility in the messages you send your audience. And honestly, I would just recommend you do it now so you're not scrambling in July. And if you are struggling with the new tool or are having trouble getting buy-in from, other team members or higher ups, that's something that we're more than happy to help with. We've done some migrations for folks from the old tools to the new tools, and help them get really familiar that with the new block builder, because we do understand that it is kind of a big change from the old marketing tools, but I do promise it will definitely be worth it in the end. The new tools let you build really beautiful emails with ease by using custom blocks that are super flexible. And you can create really custom engaging network engaging networks templates. I mean, you can put as much or as little control as you want with the templates that could be used by anyone. So, for example, if you want to create a template where you want to change almost every aspect of the email, you want to give options, you can do that. You don't have to necessarily go in there and code it. You can build it so that like, for some of our emails, we're able to easily change out the logo without having to go through and add a new picture. It's drop down, select a new logo, it's there. The link process is already set up, so we just have to add a few more things and it's ready to go. Um, and I will say the block builder is amazing. It's one of the best tools I've worked with, because you do get a really good combination of highly customizable HTML combined with, a WYSIWYG builder, which is, if you're not familiar, WYSIWYG stands for what you see is what you get. So you type something in the email, that's what it's going to look like. The new builder also has really great A/B testing tools and it has really easy options for conditional content. So it lets you test things test a lot more things a lot faster. And you can really personalize your messages to specific audiences a lot easier. All right, I think I went through a little faster than I expected, so I'm going to stop sharing.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Andy. There's so much good stuff in there. We have
Yeah.
some questions that have lined up as you were going through things as well. So just go jump right into things. So the first one we have is from Tara. She says, when we increase email frequency, revenue goes up, but so do complaints about sending too much. We've tested segmentation survey quiz funnels with mixed results. What other strategies can help us stand out in the inbox in a way that's engaging but not annoying?
Yeah, I think the like I guess I mean this may be a weird comparison, but you know how people say like the first thing they notice about somebody is their smile? I would say that is when you the first thing somebody notices about an email is probably the subject line. That's a really huge focus in the email inbox. And then there's of course the preview text right after that. I think that is a really good first place to start is looking at your subject line and preview text and kind of how you can, change it up to really engage audiences to want to open that email. I know I got an email recently from my health insurance company talking about cougar attacks in Colorado, and I was like, "Whoa, hold on! Like, I actually really want to read this because even though it's my health insurance company, I don't know why they're emailing me about cougar attacks in Colorado, but this did actually happen right after a woman unfortunately was attacked by a cougar. So, trying things that are different. Don't be afraid to try different things and see what works best with your audience. Sometimes you can maybe pull down a really small segment that is pretty highly engaged and test out some different subject lines that feel a little too out of like a little out of the realm of normal, to really engage folks. So, because once you have them opening the email, it's a lot easier to then focus on how you can try different design elements to try and get them to click through the email as well.
I love that. That's crazy too. The cougar attack. That's
Yeah,
going to live in my brain now for a while.
yeah. Every time I go
Diversion.
hiking.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no one's safe. Um, Got one here. Something I often get pushback on from our internal client is line height on emails. So something very specific, line height. What do you personally use for copy-heavy fundraising emails when it comes to that kind of element?
Yeah, so I'm trying to remember the exact number. Our email developer, Tom, he is very experienced in developing emails. He's been doing it for a long time. And I want to say it's like a certain number over the size of the text. Because if it's too close together, it feels really claustrophobic. If it feels really far apart, you kind of notice that and you're like, what's going on? So um, I want to say it's anywhere from like 8 to 12 pixels larger than the text size. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. And if anybody has any specific questions too, you're welcome to reach out to Andy. I'm sure that they have some very
Yeah.
specific parameters we can look up to if there's specific questions. Um, good question though. Another one here. Can you touch on the topic of purchased email list? They're saying on the sender reputation side, don't like them, but there are some departments that do this. Any opinions you have and how to address that internally?
I am part of an email group. It's called Email Geeks, and one of their main rules is not talking about cold emailing. So similar to buying an email list, don't email people that don't want to hear from you. That's a really good way to leave a bad taste in somebody's mouth. If you are emailing somebody that didn't ask to hear from you, didn't plan to hear from you, has never heard from you. I know that's happened to me before. I visited a website, I got an email after that. I didn't give them my email address, and I was like, I never want to hear from this person again because that's not something I consented to. And then I think also, I don't know how that impacts, like how that relates to GDPR laws, but I feel like in some places that could also be illegal. But yeah, I don't think purchased email lists are a good idea. If you're really struggling to get people to sign up for your email lists, you can also do a lot of A/B testing on your website. You can do a lot of A/B testing on what you sign, like your sign up tool, like what tool you use for signing up. Like, do you have an embedded form? Do you have a pop-up? That's a really great way to think about how you get more people to sign up for your emails. I don't think purchase lists are a good idea.
And if all else fails, just go back to cougar attacks, in the subject line.
Yeah.
There you
Yeah,
go.
that works great.
No, that's great. So someone's saying, thanks for all this, great information. This was fantastic a presentation. Can you think of one major improvement to engaging networks email functionality that you'd love to see? Something that maybe we could put in as a feature request or something that you just, something like that that you might be able to speak to.
There was something that Tom and I were just talking about the other day, and I think it was with the list with the links. But I did think of one the other day. I think one thing that would be super cool. So I've seen this in MailChimp where you can A/B test the subject line without having to create multiple emails. So the subject line and all that is set up. And I know that works a little different with when you're just trying to like segment to different audiences or use conditional content. Obviously, like if you want to send a similar email but have a slightly different subject line based on the audience, that I can see. But it is nice for in MailChimp, at least as an example, where if you're just A/B testing the subject line, you can just put in the subject line and then it'll automatically split the email between the two tests.
That's a good call. Yeah, I just made a note of that. I'll put that in as a feature request if it's not in there already. So
Cool.
good call. Um, Another one here. If I've already built our templates and custom blocks, does Corner Shop offer services to just review those and offer feedback on them?
100%. We definitely can look at existing templates and just offer tools to kind of um, like clean up the code a little bit. We do code cleanups on email templates for sure. That's definitely something we can help with. So my email is my first name, Andy at cornershopcreative.com. So you can definitely reach out. And if you have any more specific questions about that, I can definitely hook you up with somebody or even just talk to you about it.
Perfect. Yeah, just dropped Andy's email there in the chat as well. And if anybody has questions or needs to get in contact with Andy or anyone else, you can always reach out to me too, and I'll get that in the right place. Question here. How much volume do you need to get statistical relevant info to make future decisions?
So that the volume I know kind of depends on if you're looking for statistical significance, you're gonna want to look at the open rate, I think, because that is going to determine how many people. I guess it depends on what you're testing. Let me look at to get statistical relevant information to make future decisions. It depends on what. So, like I said, it depends on what you're testing. If you're testing open rates, that's something that can probably have a little bit larger audience as far as getting those. I'm forgetting the word right now, but the number of people you need, a sample size. If you're testing open rates, I think that can get you a little easier sample size, bigger sample size to figure out how many people, like what's statistically relevant as far as how many people open the email. if you are opening, if you're testing something within the email, that might be a little harder depending on how many people are actually clicking on the email. I know it's a little difficult because, if you have a really low sample size, it can be kind of difficult to figure out if your A/B test is actually statistically significant or if it's due to random chance. So if you're not sure if your test results are accurate, run it again and maybe run it with a different audience. I think again, like it really depends on how many people you have in your audience.
Okay, that's
I hope
good
that answers
insight.
your
And kind of
question.
on that note of open rates, another person's kind of asking, are open rates even a reliable metric to track currently? And can you talk more about ways to improve bounce rate?
Yeah, I know it is hard with open rates. I know now that especially I believe it's Apple will like open the email for the person and then decide, you know what, we really don't need this email. We're just gonna put this in spam or whatever. So I still think it's a valuable metric to look at because if you do notice like all of a sudden a really, really sharp decline in open rates, that could mean that your email is landing somewhere that you don't want it to. So while it's not the most important statistic to look at, I will say that it is important to just keep an eye on it. And maybe even with that Apple Mail, you can still kind of develop a baseline um, to figure out if you can increase or decrease the open rate. And what was the second part of the question? Bounce rate. Yeah. Yeah. So, um, how to increase, so if you want to improve bounce rate, that's where I'm really talking about cleaning, keeping your email list clean. I know it's kind of hard because south bounces are what usually come back when somebody has like an autoresponder or something like that. But if you have a hard bounce, there's zero reason to keep that person on your list. Remove them from your list. And again, if it's somebody that really wants to donate, and again in the future they will do it, and you'll capture them then.
Good call. Okay. What last call for questions for everybody here. I have one that I specifically just want to know about for just selfishly. But are there any design elements, I don't know, buttons, layouts, image use that you now consider non-negotiable in high stakes emails with all your experience you've seen over the years? And that can just be personal preference too from you.
I mean, we really focus on live text. I am really not a fan of like really image heavy emails, especially when you have like I know GIFs are cool and they can be cool fun to use in an email, but when it can be a little difficult if your whole email is a GIF. So I will say, for example, if you're using a GIF, if that's a non-negotiable, you have to use that. Make sure the very, very, very first frame of the GIF it has something on it because sometimes some email providers won't display the GIF or it won't play. So you're just getting a blank screen. Even if you have alt text, which is another non-negotiable, make sure you have alt text on all of your images. Make sure there's something on that very first slide so that if it doesn't show or if it doesn't load, there's at least some sort of message there. Otherwise, I would say that live buttons are also a non-negotiable. So live buttons are kind of they're code based and there's been a lot of people that have worked a lot to try and make buttons work across the board. So live coded buttons, these I don't like the term bulletproof, but they're called bulletproof buttons. They're really good for having in your email so that you can always make sure your donate button is there. Yes, and then making sure your colors are accessible. Oh, that reminded me, dark mode. Make sure you test your emails in dark mode to make sure your colors are accessible. So I have noticed with some clients where they have like red in the email, it turns sometimes into like a salmon color in dark mode and it looks really weird. So definitely make sure your colors look good in dark mode. Dark mode, unfortunately, is kind of a battle because you're making suggestions to Apple and Google about what you'd like to see for dark mode colors, but they may just ignore it. A lot of email service providers might be like, that's nice, you have this email code, but we're just going to strip it out and say we're going to put our own colors in there. So, yeah, those are some things I'd look at.
Those are great takeaways. I love that. I love yeah, don't use salmon too. That's a
Yeah.
should just be like a golden rule, I guess, out there.
Yeah.
No, that's great. That's really good. Well, actually let me just double check. I think we have one more Q&A. Oh, somebody was just asking one more thing here because based off what you just answered. Do you have a design accessibility guide that you can recommend?
I don't know if there's one specific for email. I can double check the WCAG standards, because there is a little consortium of folks that focus on web accessibility. They might have some specific notes about email, but that's actually a really good idea. And I am going to suggest to my bosses that we put that together because I will likely be the person putting that together. But I will say one thing you can use online is WCAG has a color accessibility checker, so you can just do a really quick check on your button colors. A button like if you have the background and the text color, it may look really cool together, but it may not actually be accessible. So that's a really great thing you can do to check. Is just check the text colors and make sure they pass.
Perfect. Yeah, that's great. And definitely keep us in the know about that guide if it ever comes together, because that would be really helpful to have, I think, for a lot of folks. So
Yeah,
that's
definitely.
great. Well, this has been so informative. So many good takeaways here. I have my own set of notes that I'm gonna look at as well from what you said. So thank you so much for being here, Andy. Thanks for sharing your expertise. Thanks everybody for being here, and we'll see you next time.
Yep. Thank you all so much.